For years, comic books have been a popular reading material for people around the world. Comics have almost always been around to cater to people's needs of storytelling. And now with the releases of new movies and TV shows, they are arguably more popular than they have ever been. There are so many factors that go into a comic, but what exactly makes them so interesting to read? Find out on Comics, Visual Literature. Welcome to Comics, Visual Literature, where we find out comic books have become so popular and why so many people read them. Now, I'm sure many of you know what comic books already are, but for those of you who don't, it's quite simple. Comics are just like your typical literary book, except these books have drawings inside that enhance the story for readers, making it a visual experience. Some examples of popular comics include Spider-Man, the Hulk, Justice League, and so on. And these aren't the only types of comics out there. There's also comics you see in the newspaper. There's manga, which is just Japanese comics, but today we are mainly focusing on fictional type comics. Around the late 1930s, a period known as the Golden Age of comics had begun. It was around this time in which the concept of what is known today as a superhero was born. It was also where arguably the greatest comic book hero made his debut. None other than Superman. Comics were starting to boom around this period because no one at that time had seen a man who could lift up giant cars or leap over a building in a single bound. And soon many other companies started to follow suit with more superhero type comics like Batman, Shazam, and more. Now today, those names you just heard are some of the most popular fictional characters ever. They're getting their own movies and TV shows, which are viewed by millions of people regularly. Now, how did it come to be that so many people are interested in these types of movies? Why are Hollywood studios spending the big bucks to make these movies in the first place? To try to get some insight into this, we went over to Classic Comics and Collectibles, which is one of the comic book shops in the Wisconsin area. Here's what the owner had to say about this topic.
I've been here for 5 years. First adventure, it's been going pretty well. Not getting rich, but I'm paying the bills. Well, I've been collecting since I was 12. I'm almost 50, so that's a long time of collecting, and I had this amazing collection at home. Still do have most of it, actually, in storage. I have a daughter who's 31, and at one point I was going to pass this on to her, and she honestly could care less about this kind of stuff. I tried, and it didn't work. And I still have a good 180 boxes of comics in storage, and I figured it's time to just start selling it.
For the past 5 years, he's been selling comics, and for him, the Glendale area was the perfect place to start.
I noticed on this side of town, there's no comic book stores. And so I figured this is an untapped market here in not only Glendale, but the north side of Milwaukee. I was like, you know what, let me sign a year lease, see what happens. If it's successful, great. If not, no big deal. No harm, no foul. But it worked out, and I think it did is because, once again, the films. TV shows are so huge right now. I mean, I got kids wanting Flash comics. I couldn't sell a Flash comic to save my life. No comic book store could. As soon as a TV show comes on, people want the Flash comics. Arrow. Wonder Woman is a perfect example. Young people, older people, they just want to know more about the characters. That's been really helping out big time. There's a lot of successful shows that I don't think people even realize that are comic books. Now, I mean, I think there's Teen Titans, Hulk has a show, Spider-Man has a show, Guardians of the Galaxy, I mean, these are cartoons aimed for kids. There's so many options now. I think it's just the fantasy of it, and the relatability. You can relate to Spider-Man because he was a teenager. You can relate to someone like Iron Man and Batman because they were real people. They didn't have the superpowers. They finally tapped in that the comic books are really good stories. They're well read, they're well written. I think people just saw them as just being picture books and not realizing that the stories are actually what pushed the comic books. It wasn't so much the pictures, yeah, they helped, they were cool to look at, but it was all the stories, that's what kept you going. And finally, I think they're getting that. And yeah, they're popping them out left and right, and that's honestly what I believe at 150%. That is what's helping the comic book industry right now. Because once again, as soon as a movie comes out, Doctor Strange, perfect example there. Nobody cared about Doctor Strange. Movie comes out, people are reading about Doctor Strange. They want to read the older stuff. They want to know how he came about. It didn't matter if they were black, white, girl, guy. They were just stories, fantasy stories. It's like, why do people go to movies? Why do people read novels? To escape. That was our escapism. It had cool pictures, it had cool characters that we could relate to. And I just kept it up through my whole life. Yeah, I got out of it for a while, you know what I mean? When you hit high school, you know, you kind of get out of it. But then I got to a certain age when I started having my kids, my daughter, and I went back to them for some reason. I said, okay, let me start reading these again. Now I've noticed it's taken a complete change. The kids, you're almost not cool if you don't know who Thor is, or Hulk is, or Iron Man. It's taken a complete turn. When I was younger, I started talking about that kids, oh, you're a nerd, you know, because you read comic books. I'm glad it's taken that shift, because kids don't have to hide it anymore. They can have them out, you know, pull them out their backpacks, and kids will get jealous. Oh my God, is that so-and-so? I love the fact that it changed like that. But it wasn't like that when I was a kid. Definitely not.
Comics themselves have also changed throughout time, but some of those changes can bring annoyances with some comic readers, such as reboots and character changes.
The problem with the new comics is that they keep changing things too much. They're changing genders, they're changing races for things that aren't necessary. And I think that really turned off a lot of comic book readers, because they're changing from the core reasons why we love those characters. And I think that hurt comic books for a while, and then oversaturation of the market. They were pumping out so many comics at the time, like Batman was coming out in a story every week. He had his own title. He was in Brave and the Bold, he's in Batman Beyond, you know, he's so many different titles. It's oversaturation. Same with Superman, Wolverine, Deadpool. They just kill the market. They just too much, and I think people get sick of it. And perfect example, Superman has had over 1,000 stories written about him. It's really hard to come up with something new.
Too many comics can leave readers confused as to where to start and to finish.
I started reading when I was 12 years old, probably around that age. And when I went to school, they would let us bring them to school. So me and all my buddies, we would read ours and we would trade them out. So I was reading Spider-Man and Batman. We were all over the board. And I love talking about the industry, about comics, about characters. And I'm sure if you noticed, I do more than just comics. I do records, I do books. I kind of have to have a knowledge of more than just comics, a little bit of everything. And plus I have adult comics, so you got to know that, and the kids' comics. Well, the hard thing about trading is, well, and the value of comics, they change so often. Comics can go up and down overnight. For example, let's say a character shows up in a TV show or a movie. Their first appearance can go from $4 to $20 overnight. So you really have to keep up on the value of comics. And condition. Condition is huge. A lot of people who aren't hardcore collectors don't get that. If you wrote your name in it, or there's the cover's off from the spine, that's stuff that collectors like myself aren't interested in, because you can't turn around and sell it. So you want to find the best copies that you can find. And right now the industry is big into first appearances. Everybody wants first appearance. The Deadpool first appearance, Cable first appearances, Spider-Man first. So I would suggest getting more of the modern ones that are more affordable right now. Like you can get the first appearance of Apocalypse for like still $30, $40, as opposed to Thanos, which is $1,000. You know what I mean? So you might want to start with the more affordable ones, because especially if you're young, those are going to be worth more 30, 40 years from now when you're willing and ready to sell them.
Classic Comics and Collectibles can be found at 6815 West Green Bay Avenue in Glendale. You can contact the owner at 414-351-2222.
Wow, well that definitely gave me some insight about how people would get into reading comics. And as you just saw, there were literal box loads of comics in that store. That just establishes how many comics there are out there to read. They take up every genre imaginable, and there really is something for everyone. Comics may have changed over time, but so has technology. Now there are new ways to obtain different books other than going to your local comic store. You can have them delivered to you through online services like Amazon or eBay. You can also read comics digitally on a computer, thanks to this little thing called the internet. But a main alternative to buying comics is trading. Trading is where two or more people exchange comics. An example of this is an owner trading an issue of X-Men for an issue of The Brave and the Bold. Trading doesn't necessarily have to be comic for comic. You can also trade action figures, memorabilia, DVDs, props, and all types of things. Who you trade with is entirely up to you. You can trade with friends, family, fellow comic readers, or store owners. Now, as the comic owner said, condition is a big part of trading. What you can do to keep them in good condition is keep them in a small plastic bag or wrapping of some sort. This keeps the comic from collecting dust or getting wrinkled. Now, since I've given what seems like a lot of information about comics, I'd like to make some recommendations on what to read. What you read is entirely up to you, but here are some titles you can start with if you don't know exactly what you're looking for. If you're looking for a relatable type of hero, I would suggest reading any form of Spider-Man comic. Right here I have an older issue. Some of the older issues can be found at retail stores. If you're more into teams of superheroes rather than a singular main character, I'd suggest X-Men, which has so many of them. From Wolverine to Cyclops, Beast, Frost, just so many characters. And if you're into something more gritty, The Walking Dead might be for you. But there are still many followers of the comic series that are loyal. Definitely worth a read. Now we head over to our second shop to dive into the subject of visual literature. This next shop is The Turning Page, which is in the Milwaukee area. Adam White, co-owner of the shop, had his own input on the subject.
I got into comics about 3 or 4 years ago. I used to collect them when I was a kid, and I got back into them. A friend kind of taught me how to, buy and sell comics, and he was friends with the previous owner who owned this store. He passed away about 1.5 years ago, and then me and his nephew remodeled it and took it over January of 2017 last year. We reopened it in January of 2017, but the Turning Page comic store has been here since, I think, 1978. Yeah, so it's been here for a long time. Yeah, we do video games, trades, toys, records, antiques, anything that's collectible or valuable.
Adam considers new comic book movies as a source of increased success for the store.
The success of the movies is obviously because everyone used to read the comic books when they were younger, and they, relate to it. And then, it's been a resurgence of people who used to read them, and now they see the movies and they want to go back to their old stories and read comic books. And, it's kind of like a nostalgic thing, something you used to get into when you were younger. And then even the young kids, young people, they see the movies and they see the TV shows, and they want to read all the stories that they see on TV. So, yeah, it's been a huge jump in, I think, sales in comic books over the last few years. My dad used to take me to the comic book store when I was a kid, and they used to have the cartoons on in the early 90s, the X-Men cartoons and Spider-Man and stuff, so I was probably 10 or 11, so that's kind of something I related to, superheroes and comics and stuff like that. And as I got older, I kind of got out of it. It wasn't really that cool, comic books when you're in high school and stuff, so, but last, 4 or 5 years ago when I got back into comics, just reminds me of, as a kid reading comics, and it's a nostalgic thing, like collecting them and reading them and going after the comics you used to have when you were a kid, so that was kind of fun. So DC's pretty popular now. They have their Metal Story. It's kind of like with Justice League and some other characters in there, some new characters. Sandman, that's done by a popular team, Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo. Then you got DC, Marvel, and then Image. And they put out pretty good stories too. Not so many superhero stuff, but it's more of like adult comics. So. Best part for me is I just like getting the new comics every week, seeing what comes out. I read some of them. I don't really do it so much for the money. I just like comic books, collecting them, buying them, selling them, trading them. It's a hobby of mine. This isn't even my full-time job. It's just part-time. Me and my partner, he runs it full-time during the day. I just so happen to be off work today, so. So it's just fun, man. we do shows. I do my own comic shows. We travel. We go all over the Midwest to different comic shows, buying and selling, and trying to find collections, and just really fun hobby to get into. But issue number 1 always sells first because people always want to read that first book. You know, people, like Spider-Man's on like 795. Some people think they have to read the first Spider-Man just to jump in, you know, but you don't. They do different arcs for each, you know, 4 or 5 issues. So rebooting it doesn't really do a whole lot. That's where Marvel was messing up. They kept rebooting their stuff. DC's kind of stopped over the last few years rebooting. They did the Rebirth, and now they're going on 3 years of not doing that. And Marvel went back to all their old numbering because they kind of realized the fans just want good stories, good art. It doesn't even matter if it's a new number 1. They just want, you know, the meat of the story and everything. So Marvel's went away from rebooting, and hopefully they quit doing it because, you know, it just kind of saturates everything. You don't know where to start or where to end, you know. Which number 1 is what came before what, so, yeah.
As much as TV shows expose viewers to the original comics, TV shows also see success in accordance with their comic book counterparts.
Yeah, that makes them more popular, you know. Walking Dead was a nothing book until, I mean, not nothing, but it wasn't as popular until the show came out. So it's cool that they make that stuff into movies and TV because, you know, it makes it interesting. I think hopefully, you know, Saga, that's a real popular story, and that's done by Image. Hopefully sooner or later, I think I read that they're probably going to do maybe a movie or TV once the comics ended. So it's just cool to watch that stuff too. I like watching that stuff. Yeah, a lot of people come in sometimes and ask, you know, where should they start? And usually if it's new books you're looking for, I would just jump right in. You don't need the previous 800 issues to catch up. You know, every 4 issues they have a new story. You just jump in and just start reading whatever you like, whatever characters you connect with, whether it be Batman or Superman, Spider-Man. And then you can always go back and try to find those previous issues as well. It makes it fun, like a treasure hunt. You go out and find the issues you're missing. Well, their parents connected with it, and then they introduced it to them, and everyone's just, you know, everyone really likes comic books. I think they'll always be around, and people will always be interested in comic books as long as they're putting out decent material and stuff. So it'll always be popular, I think.
The Turning Page can be found at 2452 North Murray Avenue in Milwaukee.
Now, let's take a look at the elements that make a comic book interesting to read. First, the narrative. A good narrative can make the difference between a comic that looks good and a comic that can be emotionally invested in. The comic Civil War by Marvel is a good example. That particular comic has received critical acclaim by many comic readers to the point that a movie was made out of the comics, which is known as Captain America: Civil War. That's not to say that people don't pick up comics just to look at the illustrations too. There are plenty of people that buy comics solely because of the artwork, and that's okay. The talented illustrators and artists should be commended for their hard work that they put into making the characters, environments, and backgrounds look great. I can't give any specific recommendations as to which comics look the best because beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Frank Miller has done work on Sin City. Jim Lee is also one of the best at drawing Batman, although I'd highly recommend reading Sin City. Jack Kirby was one of the innovators of writing and drawing comics, having worked on many of the Marvel originals like Black Panther and the Avengers. These are just a few names off the list of endless people whose art pops through the pages of comics. But none of that would be possible without the mind to create these ideas. The writer arguably has the most difficult role of making these characters relate to their fans. Without the writers to help, most of these other aspects about comics would be much more difficult to create. Some of the best writers include Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Robert Kirkman, and of course, Stan Lee. Again, this is just a small list of names to give some people a place to start in terms of finding some comic book writers. These guys use their experiences in life to create these characters so that others are inspired by them to create their own characters or comics or anything they can think of. So in summary, thanks for watching, and hopefully this inspired you to want to pick up a comic and start reading.